with the one who invented Stellarium, hardly appears in the world in real life. So we are all happy that we really exist. Actually, first materialized somehow here at the stage. Welcome to Jena. Welcome to the world of real people.
I used to have here before another subject. So I think everyone knows Stellarium, so I'm not going to introduce that. Today I'm just going to talk about the technical subject, so it's about the file format that we use for scale culture information. So a bit about what Georg just showed, and then a new format that I'm working on. How do you do that? So quickly, I created Stellarium in year 2000. I was a student back then, and I was a maintainer for about, I would say, 10 years or something. And then slowly there is a transition with Alexander and Georg, who took over in a very good way. It's a very high burden work. And since then I was very busy in I had other job. It was a side project. And then about 10 years ago, I started to work again on the mobile version. And only since about 2017, I was able to financially sustain myself and work full time on this mobile version that we actually sell for the mobile phones. And also spend a lot of time working on the web version of Stellarium. I don't know if you're aware of that. I wanted to show you, but I have no computer here, so it's basically a very simplified version of Stellarium running on the web browser. And the main goal to do that was to allow people who are not tech savvy, because for example in schools, installing Stellarium on a computer, it was already too complicated for many people. So now they just need to go to a link and it's working. So it's really used in schools. So a quick history, but I'm not going to go into full description here because I think Georg provided much more information than I wanted to show already. So just originally when I started Stellarium, I just displayed the regular constellation using a stick line. And in 2004, Johan Maurice sent me an email and say, oh, look, I've drawn all the constellation on my PC. I'm a student, I'm very interested. So sent me all of this, and I included that into Stellarium. And I have to say, actually, from this point, it's when Stellarium really started to take off, because it was really beautiful to show the picture with all the images. And then the general public started actually to use it a lot. And then we got millions of users and new developers joined the project, etc., etc. So it was really the trigger point to add those illustrations to make the project famous. In 2004 also, Rob Spearman, who was at that time working on the project and who is now working on planetariums, also suggested to create alternative scale cultures. And he sent me originally the data for the Polynesian scale culture with a few constellations only. And it's the day I started to work on being able to switch from one culture to the next one. So it's already quite old also. And since that time, of course, a lot of new features were added, but Georg just showed, I think, most of it. So now there are 53 Sky Culture in Stellarium desktop. So it was a big success in this respect. So under the hood in Stellarium desktop, Georg also just showed that you have a lot of different file formats. So there are 6 files which are called .fab, like Fabien created a long time ago. All of them have a different format, so it's kind of messy. But and we are containing the lines for the constellation, the names, the translation, and this kind of data. There is also now this .ini file that Georg just showed, which contains more high-level metadata, let's say, and also multiple description, let's say free text format files, which, as Susanne pointed out, is very difficult to translate because it's completely human-made right now. So everything is unsynchronized usually. There are the image for the illustration and also other files for the reference.
Actually, there's now the translation is the English file is split in simple translitex and it is translated sentence by sentence.
Sentence by sentence,
So
yes.
nowadays the other languages are really created from the English translation as translation goes. If the English text changes, it should go via translates to the translators.
Okay.
But this is only like 1 year ago.
Yeah, okay. I'm not aware of all the last development. I have to point out since a few years I'm not really following accurately what's going on Stellarium desktop, so I might say things which are not relevant anymore. And then, yeah, the translated content is stored in several places, which is maybe not true anymore, but last time when I worked on that, there was a lot of PO file, which is a text file format for translation data, and also a description which is stored in this free text file. So all of this means we have like a dozen of files with different file formats, and also a lot of historical background, you'd say. And it's not so simple. And I think I'm entitled to say that because I'm the one who actually did this mess. So I think it's fair that I say it. And next slide. In 2017, my brother, Ion, who is also a programmer and work on let's say, Stellarium, started to work on the web version of Stellarium, which is a much simpler and lighter version with a very small code base, which was designed to be very light because we wanted to execute this in the web engine, in the web browser, sorry. And he wanted first to use the existing scale filters, but it turned out it was too complicated. There were too many files, and when you do web application, you cannot make a lot of requests to download a lot of files, and also you don't want to create a lot of complicated code to load those files. One of the complications is that the loading a file on the web is asynchronous, so you need to somehow send a lot of queries, then synchronize everyone, and then analyze what you just downloaded. So it was really too complicated. So he designed a very simple JSON format. So I think everyone knows JSON now. It's a JavaScript object notation. This format is very well known, and at the time when I created Stellarium, it was not existing. So that's one of the reasons I didn't use that back then. So I will show you more in detail what this file format contains. So it was originally developed for Stellarium Web for those technical reasons, but then when we work on Stellarium Mobile, which is based on the same code as Stellarium Web, we also, of course, adopted this new format. So this is I can show you the previous slide. So this is more or less a snapshot of what you have in a Sky Culture directory, with a lot of different files and formats, and now the new directory for Sky Culture is basically that. So you have one directory for the illustration images, one PO directory which contains all the translations related to this Sky Culture. So it's completely self-included. You have one index.json, which is the one I just talked about, which contains some data, and then another file which I'm going to show you after. So one of the first things we did it was to change the way we define the lines, the stick lines. In Stellarium, as Georg showed you, you have to define each pair of stars, and you define a lot of segments, but it was a bit complicated, so now we have allowed to define a list of shapes, sequence of stars, so you don't have to use pair of stars, but you can do like 3 or 4 stars in a row, and which makes a line. Then you can use another segment. And it's not only simpler for the people who develop this calculator, it's also faster, because when you display all the segments at once, it's faster than displaying a lot of segments separately in terms of OpenGL processing, let's say. We also did a simple but very useful trick to avoid losing some information when you resize an illustration. You have an illustration of a PNG of a constellation, and in some cases, especially for the web version, we wanted to downscale them to make them smaller. But when you did that, you were actually destroying the information, because this part here is actually pixel information. So if you change the size of the image, the pixel information becomes wrong, basically. So now what we did, that we added this side, which means those pixel information are valid if the image has this side. So basically, it allows you to be resolution independent. We also added, so maybe all of this exists now in Stellarium desktop. I'm not completely sure, but we added support for dark constellation, which are constellation without stick lines, for example. Also, illustration without stick line, and also one-star constellation. So in some scale culture, you have constellation which are just fixed to one star. We also had requesting to make some bullet lines that you can see here. The big deeper is a bit more visible than the rest of the great layer. You can also make thinner lines. This was done to match the sky and telescope style maps. And one of the main changes, which I have spent a lot of time on, is to create this markdown file. So you're probably familiar with Markdown now, it's quite famous as well. It's a kind of free text file, free content file, in which you can more or less write whatever you want. But in this case, in the case of Stellarium, it's not completely free. You have to use a defined structure. So, for example, the title, introduction, description, reference, author is mandatory. So there are mandatory sections which have to contain some content in a given form. So it's not completely markdown, it's markdown with some constraints, let's say. And I use this format instead of fitting everything into the JSON file, because writing long text or sometimes with non-ASCII characters in JSON is really painful. You have a lot of double quotes and stuff like that. So using this format allows to have something very easy to edit. And the big bonus is that if you go to GitHub, where I store the files, you can actually click on edit, and you can edit the content visually, which is almost like you're using Word, basically. So it's a big improvement, I think, compared to the previous files. I also use some custom markdown, and for example, for the references here, I use a specific unofficial way to define them with the hash. I spent a lot of time on that, and it's the best idea I could find, which is not optimal, but at least it's working. Yeah. So this file, when it's loaded by the application, is combined with the JSON. For example, the constellation name, I don't put them here, but are matched with the name into the JSON file, and everything is kind of merged on load time. Some new things I did also is that you can now define some native and like functioning, for example, here, and pronunciation for each names, not only for constellation, but also for star or DSO. And you can also define several names for one object, not only a constellation, but also for star or anything else. So basically, you can just define any object here. Difficulty with this mouse. Okay, anyway.
Using this one.
Yeah, but okay, nice. Okay, never mind. So we can define several names, and currently in the mobile version of Stellarium, we actually display the extra names in the additional information when you click on the object. I cannot change the slide again. Yeah, other improvement we did is that, for example, in some cases, we want to display the Latin name. For example, for the Western scale culture, we want to display the Latin name. If you're an English person, the most commonly used is the Latin name. So, for example, you would say Ursa Major instead of the Great Bear, but it still exists. The Great Bear still exists, and sometimes people actually search for it in the search text. So we need to also store this information. And not only that, but the Great Bear also has to be translated in other language. For example, in French, we say La Grande Ourse, and nobody is going to look for Ursa Major. And you don't really want to translate Ursa Major into La Grande Ourse because it's Latin name. It's kind of native name. So now that we are able to store both names, so the real native name, which is Latin in English, and also the, let's say, common name, which is the Great Bear, which is used as a base for translation for some language. But not all the language want to use a translation, so it has to be defined as a metadata information. In English, I think in Portuguese and maybe Spanish, the Latin name are used, and in other languages, usually not. We also add metadata, which is kind of equivalent to the .ini file that is now existing in Stellarium desktop. So we add a region name. We also have a thumbnail, which is a screenshot of the mobile version where when you want to select a scale filter, you see not a thumbnail but a highlight. So it's going to point in a given specific place, which is defined as a metadata, so that your user can see something relevant in the sky. And the main, I'll say the most important part of all this work was the translation, because translation is really a complicated issue. And in Stellarium desktop, we have like hundreds of megabytes of translation files, which is kind of redundant, also sometimes messy, and it's very the process is very complicated as well. So how to translate all those information, which is spread out in many files, and sometimes has long content, sometimes short content. It needs a lot of background, and yeah, you need a lot of background to translate properly as well. So first of all, we switch to gettext for everything. So the PO file is used for every content, including the very long description files. And also, each calculator has its own translation. So if you want to add a new calculator, you can just add the directory with the translation for this calculator, or if you want to remove it, you remove it, but you don't need to change other files from the main application. So it's completely independent now. And we have done tools and also special code in the engine to actually avoid duplication, which was one of the main issues we had in terms of size, for example. A good example is the Chinese constellation. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but basically all the star names have a name which is constellation name, with sometimes added or not, and then a number which is usually in a Roman numeral, you call that. And currently in Stellarium desktop, all of this is stored as a standalone string. So the translator has to translate all of this one by one, which obviously makes a huge translation file because there are thousands of those. So now we have added in the code some specific tricks for this case, where you only translate once the name of the constellation, and the rest is kind of metadata. So it translates only one time the name, and everything is automated. So this has to be done by the tool which generates the gettext file, the PO file, and it also has to be done when you load the translation by the engine itself, by Stellarium. So besides the file format, there was also a lot of data cleanup which was done for Stellarium mobile. So the intent here was to display to the users of the app, so which can be a kid or like normal people, not experts, some information which is very simple, short, and clear, let's say, and consistent. So we spent quite a lot of time, also with Susanne, in 2021, I think it was. So the main job was to actually clean up the description, remove some chunks which were too detailed, and put them in secondary files so that users are not exposed to that. Proofreading, rewrite some part of the content. Sometimes there are a lot of typos, or sometimes it was not clear. So it was really quite a lot of manual work, and and also there was this issue with the license. So it took me about 1 year to send an email to all the stakeholders, the one who actually created the constellation since 10 years, to ask them what is the license. What do they want to use? They accept. So it was quite complicated task. Some people are not reactive. It took sometimes 6 months to get an answer, or some people actually died who did some constellation. So it was difficult to get all of that. And at least for Stellarium Mobile, which is a commercial project, we were really strict. And if you don't have a clear answer, or if the people is not replying, we just had to remove the scale filter from the data set. And all of this was done kind of independently from the main Stellarium desktop project. So it was really for the mobile version that we did this. So some information was injected back into Stellarium desktop, like for the license, for example. But like, for example, all the text rewriting and the cleanup was not reintegrated mostly in Stellarium desktop. So we are actually having now diverging data, which is not good. So we now have 33 scale culture using this new format. So as I say, they are kind of diverging. They match mostly what we have in Stellarium desktop, but not completely. And all this data is stored in a sub-project of the Stellarium project. It's called Stellarium Sky Culture. So you can all have a look at that. This is, by the way, the user interface that is used in the mobile version of Stellarium. So when you list the Sky Culture, which is something like that, you can scroll the list. So the template that I'm looking for is the image that we here. So what do we plan to do now? Starting from there, we have a lot of work to do. First, we need to add all the things which are missing in this new format, which are existing in Stellarium desktop. So one of them is the asterism, which is not supported. So to define some sub-line stick associated to a constellation or not. And the big chunk of work is to actually, at least what I would like to have, is to support this new format into Stellarium desktop so that we can finally share the same data for everyone. It's also very needed because if you want to have people actually work on this format, we need an easy tool to test the data files, like in live. Currently, it's possible to test slightly when you have, for example, your file on GitHub, you can tell the web version to actually use it and display it in the web version of Stellarium Web. It works, but it's not very convenient because you don't want to go online, edit your file, save it, put it to GitHub, and then try again. So it's too complicated. You need a local tool to do that. And why I didn't do that yet, because it's complicated. One of the main problem is the way the object names, like the Sky object name, are stored in both applications. It's not the same process. So in Stellarium desktop, you have a lot of modules which all have their names in kind of independent way. And in Stellarium mobile, we have a long list of all the names, the common names. So it's much simpler to deal with how, when you click on an object, how do you check if there is a structural name associated to this object, and how do you fall back to a, let's say, an international name if there is none, etc., etc. And all of this, nothing is really complicated, but the way it's working in both apps is quite different. So it needs a lot of work and a lot of testing because there will be a regression probably. And because it's a lot of work, we are also, I speak as a Stellarium Lab owner, willing to provide funding for people who want to work on that. So it'll be something for Georg if he has free time, for example. Other thing we would like to add is to add some custom overlays, which I know partially exist on Stellarium desktop for displaying, for example, the mansions or houses in other culture. So these kind of lines here, which are not strictly speaking constellation, but are kind of related to some areas. We don't even have the notion of this entity in Stellarium right now, like something we need to think about. Because ideally we want to display that, but also be able to select it and get some information about it. So you need to add some kind of entity. There's also the notion of variant, which came from discussion with Susanna 2 years ago, like, and Georg, like some sky culture have variation, but it's just sometimes two constellations which are different from the original one. And if you want to preserve this data, we don't want to duplicate everything just to change to constellation. So maybe we need a way to add some kind of patch on the top of an existing sky culture instead of repeating everything. Duplication is difficult to maintain, and if you can reduce that, it will be much easier to manage the growing complexity of this data. There are also changes that we're working actually now on. It's to associate some illustration to other objects like a star or a planet. some scale culture, they display like I think the Navarro scale culture, they have actually images linked to planets. They're supposed to move with the planet. And when you click on the image or on the planet, you want to actually see the information about this scale cultural information. You don't want to see Venus, you want to see the information about this image. So the link between the planet and the scale cultural information is not existing yet, not really. And finally, so I want to say that this new file format is working very well for our use case, which is to display for normal, let's say, general public, well presented and simple information. And also the secondary goal was to make it easy to maintain, which was, I think, the biggest problem for the current format. But it's still not finished. So first we need a wider adoption, and hopefully everyone should switch to this new format if everyone agrees that it's better than the previous one. And also need some extension. We have a discussion, I see, and I hope I will see during this meeting a lot of inputs for me of what you guys want to store. I'm sure there are many things I'm not even aware exist, like some weird shapes or pattern or changing data that you want to store in a way in this data set. So how to put this academic grade data inside this new file format, how to filter it to display what a user wants to see and especially not display what a user don't want to see. And yeah, how to manage with variant or inheritance between scale culture. So it's something I'm going to work actually in the next weeks. So it's really a good time to give me some input. That's it.